So this is a slide that talks about what we did as an office. So the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. If law enforcement is unable to give us cases to charge, how were we going to hold ourselves accountable? How were we going to try to help this situation? This is important because we know from data analysts who are involved in this program, that when young people are involved in risky behavior like car theft, it quickly escalates within a couple of months to something more serious. And so in the past, this office's position would have been, there's nothing we can do. Until you can bring us a case, there's nothing we can do. So it's important to understand that this is not diversion. It's not designed for cases that law enforcement presents to us with sufficient evidence to charge. That's not what this is about. This is about those cases where they don't have enough evidence to bring us a case to charge, yet they know who the young people are who are at risk. So what we did at the county attorney's office is we created an entirely new voluntary pathway for those young people and their families. We also did some internal restructuring with our youth prosecution division, where we made it much more possible for us to charge cases more quickly. In the past, when a youth's case, a car theft, had been submitted to us, it often took weeks or months. Actually, any youth auto kind of case. And that's a problem because we know youth respond to the idea that there's going to be a consequence quickly. They need accountability quickly. If we got a case from law enforcement and it took weeks or months to charge, it was not effective with young people. So what our goal is to not wait for young people to commit a car theft where they got caught and a case got presented to us or something more serious. Our goal was to try to intervene before they became involved in the system or someone was a victim. Obviously, it's better. Nobody wants to be a victim. Nobody wants to have their car stolen. Nobody wants to have anything happen to them. And so the idea was to try to prevent that from happening in the first place. So Sarah Davis, who's behind me, I'm going to pass it over to her. She's going to talk about how the program actually works.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Davis. I'm Deputy County Attorney and the Director of our Children and Families Division. I'm going to attempt to go back one slide here. So there's two prongs to this initiative. The first prong is this early intervention pathway that Mary spoke about. And this is really about putting in place access to voluntary services for youth and family before they become involved in the criminal legal system. As you can see, this is one-way information sharing. And so what we set up with our law enforcement partners was regular meetings and opportunities for them to share information about young people that they had concerns about related to youth auto theft related behaviors, but did not have sufficient evidence to present a case to our office for charging. Our team would then review for eligibility. And what that means in practice is that our youth prosecution, our child protection, and our truancy teams would do a file clearance to see if that young person is already receiving services through the county through a different system involvement. And then if not, and if they were eligible, they would be referred to social workers for outreach to the family and youth to provide voluntary services. So we began this work in June of 2023. And between June of 2023 and May of 2024, we had 205 youth referred by law enforcement for this initiative. 107 of those were screened in as eligible. So again, those who were screened out were likely already system involved in some way, already receiving services. They may have an open case in which they're already on probation or receiving services through the court. They may have a social worker through child protection or be receiving services through our truancy work. And this is important, again, because it's one-way information sharing. So law enforcement refers the case to us. 107 are screened in as eligible, and then of those 107, 105 had been referred to a social worker for outreach and services as of the time that we pulled this data. And so participation is completely voluntary, but what we're finding is that youth and families are overwhelmingly accepting these services, which really aligns with research that demonstrates that voluntary interventions with youth are most successful. We receive referrals from all over the county. This slide shows you that the majority of the highest percentage of our referrals come from the sheriff's office. It's important to know that their work spans the entire county, so they refer youth from across the county. Each referral is attributed to a single agency, even if multiple agencies have had contact with that young person. And then if they're screened in as eligible, what do the social workers do? So they attempt contact with the youth and the family. They, as of this data, they had attempted contact with 100% of the youth and families referred to them and successfully made contact with 73% of those youth and families. And among those successfully contacted, so among that 73%, social workers offered or directly provided resources to 95% of the youth and families. And this is very individualized, right? It's very much about what does this young person and family need to be successful moving forward. It can include the county's family response stabilization services, mental health resources, case management, public assistance, transportation, sometimes just meeting basic needs like clothing, food, shelter, and working related to school re-enrollment. And so that's for the first prong. For the second prong, this was about our internal work, saying if we're going to ask our partners to refer youth for early intervention, we also need to be accountable here at the county attorney's office for intervening quickly as well. So this is for those young people where law enforcement has been able to submit a case to us, where we really committed to reducing the amount of time to charging. Anybody who has a young person in their life knows that if you wait months, sometimes even a year before you put accountability measures in place, it's way too long and they've already moved beyond whatever it was that happened. And as Mary mentioned earlier, our partners in law enforcement were seeing very quick escalation in behaviors. So we committed to making this change internally where we significantly decreased charging time. So we increased by 18% the number of decisions that were made within 3 days, and by 24% the number of decisions that were made within 10 days. And we also worked with our partners. I want to thank our partners in the court system who worked to put in place immediate access to voluntary services once a young person is charged. Because simply charging a young person is not an effective intervention. It's having them enter the system with immediate access to those voluntary services. And I'm going to pass it back to Mary.
Every threat we prevent, or every theft, we prevent is one less youth driving dangerously, putting others and themselves at risk. Every theft we prevent is one less youth entering the system at all. So this is a slide about what has happened once a social worker has reached out and offered services. And, in a nutshell, the program is working really well. So 95 were referred to a social worker. And when we say referred, this is about the family. It's not only about the young person, it's about the family and trying to get the family the services that they need to stabilize the young person so that they're not engaging in this risky behavior. So 77 young people had no new charged cases between their date of referral to services and the date of the most recent check for new charge cases. That is 81%. 81%, which is unheard of. 81% of those young people have not been referred for a new case. They haven't been charged with a new case. We also know, this is on the next slide here. So here are auto thefts as reported throughout the county. Last year, January through May, there were about 4,800 car thefts reported. This year, that same period of time, it's down to about 3,300. So a dramatic decrease in the numbers of car thefts reported. This data comes from the Minnesota BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. This data comes from law enforcement. So each department is responsible for submitting this data. This data comes directly from law enforcement partners throughout Hennepin County. So this next slide pertains to Minneapolis and Minneapolis alone, and we'll be hearing shortly from Elliott Payne, President of the Minneapolis City Council. But if you look at the data here, you can see from January 1st to June 24th, 2024, the Minneapolis Police Department reports a 29% decrease in car thefts reported. And we broke this down by ward. So as you all know, Minneapolis has 13 wards, and car theft is down in every single ward, ranging from, I think, 16% to 36%. We know, crime had gone down. There was one place where it continued to go up, and that was car theft. So this is incredibly good news that car theft is going down. So we also know that we at the county attorney's office are receiving far fewer cases from law enforcement. So there's a drop in 48% of cases that we've received. The clearance rates, by the way, have stayed about the same. So law enforcement isn't clearing any additional cases. Car theft is going down, however. So this is part of a broader Hennepin County Attorney's Office to implement policies and practices that are grounded in research and evidence to improve outcomes. Our goal is to improve community safety and well-being through both individual and system accountability that leads to these kind of positive outcomes for youth, family, and our communities. We're grateful to our partners for collaborating with us to achieve these promising results in the context of youth auto thefts. We know that interventions, and Sarah talked about this a little bit, with youth are most effective when they are immediate. So as close as possible in time to the behavior. Relational. We know that youth are much more accountable to relationships than they are to rules. Individualized. We have to account for the individualized strengths and needs of each youth and family, and that's why Sarah said the services that are offered are individualized to what that family needs. Community-based, connected to the youth and family's community, regardless of level of services and supports needed. Both parts of this initiative, the new early voluntary interventions pathway and the expedited court interventions, are built on this framework, and we're seeing the impact in improved outcomes for both youth and community safety. Waiting for young people to steal cars, potentially hurting others or themselves, and gain a criminal record is not the answer. This initiative shows that when prosecutors, law enforcement, and social workers work together to intervene early and support young people and their families, we can prevent crime from occurring. Early intervention helps improve justice and public safety for everyone. I want to hand it over to Council President Elliott Payne.
Thank you, Attorney Moriarty. Hello, everyone. I'm Elliott Payne. I'm the Minneapolis City Council President. And you may be wondering, why am I here? Well, I'm here because the City of Minneapolis is in the process of building a comprehensive public safety system. What does that mean? It means we're building out a foundation with these pillars of prevention, response, and restoration. And that can sound very academic. So what does that mean in practice? What it means in practice is programs like this, early intervention, making sure that we're intervening before we get to the point of there being risks in our community, harm to our young people, and families broken apart. It means partnering with jurisdictions at the city, county, state, and federal level to bring these programs into fruition, whether that is working with AG Ellison on putting more pressure on Hyundai and Kia to repair their cars from being vulnerable to auto theft, to pressuring NHTSA at the federal level to do the same and ask for a nationwide recall, and doing that across the nation with other local jurisdictions. And so this work is going to take a lot of time, and it needs to be built on data. And today we are recognizing the results, right? We have clear results about what it means to do early intervention. And we have results that are showing a level of efficacy that goes far and beyond our ability to respond to this with just police. And when I meet with our police chief, he will be the first to tell you that it is extraordinarily hard to build cases. It is extraordinarily hard to get the evidence necessary to be able to prove without a reasonable doubt that somebody committed this crime. We need to get ahead of those challenges doing programs like this, early intervention. This is how we're going to have a robust, comprehensive public safety system in the city of Minneapolis and throughout the county. So, thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Sure. I'm wondering for youthful people who have been charged, and then you provide services to them. Are these children who are still in a juvenile facility, or more of have been already released? I'm kind of curious where you provide those services to them.
And I want to emphasize again, this pathway, these are not the cases that law enforcement sends to us that are prosecutable. When if a case is prosecutable, we will prosecute it, and then it depends on the individual youth as to what kind of services that they will receive. I think it's also important, too, to know that young people are arrested and they're held at the Juvenile Detention Center, but if we don't get the case from law enforcement, that's outside of our control. So sometimes you will hear in the media that young people have been arrested, or the police think that the same young people are being arrested. We're mostly not getting those cases. So I don't know if did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, are there certain cases when there's, depending on the person, like you're able to provide some services to a person in a juvenile detention facility?
Well, the juvenile detention facility is a holding area. It's not designed to give young people services. So we use all of our tools at the county attorney's office. And, unfortunately, that includes sometimes certifying youth as adults, which we did in the Mall of America shooting. There was a young person that we agreed to certify as an adult, and he was sent to adult prison. That's on one end. And there are lots of ways to try to intervene in a young person's life. We don't have enough resources to do that. This program is on the other end of the spectrum, but it did not exist until 1 year ago. Yeah, Jana.
What percentage of cases over 23 and 24, when we talk about auto theft, are youth? How many, is it 50% are done by youth, 60%, 20%? So I'm saying, like, where do you fall into this carve-out problem as a whole?
Sure. We don't have that data specifically. So for example, the data, can I have the clicker for a second? Related to Minneapolis, that's just reported auto thefts. And because a lot of them aren't solved, right? The clearance rate, as Mary mentioned, hovers around 4%. Unless they're solved, we don't know if it was a young person or an adult or some combination. So what we have to look at is the data that law enforcement reports to the state, and I believe this actually came from MPD's crime dashboard themselves, about how many auto thefts are being reported to them. But we can't break that down by youth or adult unless it's solved. And so that's where what we can look at is how many cases are being submitted to our office by law enforcement for charging consideration for young people in the context of auto theft. And that's where, when we looked at January through May of 2023, which was the period of time before this initiative started last year and compared that to January and May of 2024, during which time this initiative had been up and running and was continuing, it was a 48% drop in those submissions. It's a great question, but unless the cases are cleared, we can't determine whether it was a young person or an adult.
My second question may be just a little bit more heady and, you know, you gotta kind of think, we're not talking about specific individuals, but when I look at the services that you are able to provide these youth that accept or the families that accept, a common perception, unfortunately, in community is that the kinds of kids that do this are X, Y, Z. And it looks like a lot of the services that you're providing are showing, at least to me, that they need some basic needs that aren't even being met. The people that are stealing cars are not getting these needs met. Clothing, shelter. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think the success of this program shows that, right? If these are the services that are being offered, oops. Well, I've ruined it now. Yeah, the services that are being offered are pretty basic, right? So if providing those basic services mean that 81% of these young people aren't coming back with a charged case is huge. These are young people who, you know, were coming off of COVID. There are mental health issues. There's housing instability, food insecurity, all of these issues. And if we can intervene with those basic things that every young person should have, that can help stabilize that young person's household and to the extent that they're not engaging in this kind of behavior. So absolutely.
I have a couple thoughts here. There's a lot to unpack with everything, and some of my reporting I do in the community. One, you mentioned the Mall of America. I know off topic, but you said you went and certified a teenager in that case. But Judge Scoggin did at sentencing question why more of these young people who basically assassinated that young man were in charge in the adult system. So some of the criticism that's in the community is how you go after sort of the more hardened offender. I understand there's great success in this. My question, I guess, is kind of packed into like, who do you think we're sweeping up in this? Like the kids on the periphery who are, have the candy bar in the back seat, let's hop in the car with the kid who's got the gun, if you will. Like, are we sweeping up real potential dangerous offenders? I think about recently, case made some headlines. I think Fox 9 has certainly mentioned it. A kid with several arrests documented, even a couple prior charges. He's got guns. He's got a baby loose in the back seat. He's a teenager. I mean, that kid is a danger to society. I mean, the criticism I think this office gets is we don't go after necessarily the worst offenders or most dangerous offenders hard. Can you speak to still going after and keeping the community safe from the real dangerous folks while trying to maybe help these people on the periphery of these crimes, if you will?
So the one case you talked about of the young person who was said by MTPD to have a number of arrests was not submitted to our office for over a month. So that young person was in the community. When it was submitted, we charged it. When we get cases from law enforcement that are prosecutable, we prosecute them. So what I would say, the answer to your question is this. I look at certification studies. So if we have a young person who has engaged in some violence and we ask for potential certification, we get a psychological report, we get a study from probation. What strikes me, and I've seen a number of those, and what strikes me is in many of those situations, the young person wasn't in school. The young person wasn't in school. They were as part of child protection. Their family moved from house to house to house. All of the things that are being offered here, I often think if those things had been offered to this young person, they probably wouldn't be here. And that's supported by the data from CISA, the intelligence data from the sheriff's office. That's why I said their data is showing that young people who are involved in risky behavior and car theft, in a matter of months, are escalating to carjackings, gun crimes, and that kind of thing. So there's no like hardened young person who just decides to go out and shoot somebody. It starts when they're young. And if we can have these effective interventions early on, they may not be with us. They may not victimize somebody else, which is why, you know, sometimes people say, well, why aren't you focused on accountability? We are. When law enforcement brings us a prosecutable case, that doesn't just mean an arrest, we prosecute it. We hold young people accountable. But that's after the fact. And I'm pretty sure you've talked to a number of victims who would tell you, I would rather that the young person not harmed me. That's what this is about. So we use all of our tools at the county attorney's office. We do hold people accountable. When you report there were a number of arrests or something like that, it's really important to look, if you can, because you can't get access.
That's part of the problem, we're trying to like with this information you're giving us today, like, who are these 95 people we've contacted? Like, let me see their like, you know, you can't do that, and we can't see it, so we're taking your word too from this, you know, in a way.
Well, so what I would tell you is, why do you take law enforcement's word?
Well, yeah, no,
You do.
but we
You
also
report,
get yours today, and
you report
these
law
numbers
enforcement.
without clarity on
So what I would say to all of you, actually, when law enforcement says about a young person, they've been arrested many, many times, inquire about that. How many of those cases were actually submitted to the county attorney? Inquire about that. Here, you know, one important thing about this actually is, Sarah mentioned that it's a one-way informational system. And that means that even we don't know which kids are part of services in the county. Child protection, we don't know, or we know, because we have child protection, which young people those are, but we can't share that out with you. We can't share it out to law enforcement. We just can't share it out. They're young people. That is the law. But what we can tell you, and a lot of this data comes from behavioral health in the county, that we know that these young people are not being referred to us for prosecutable cases at a rate of 81%. The fact that you don't know who they are is neither here nor there.
I don't need names, I mean, you know, what was their connection to X crime? Like, how
Well,
did these people come to you? You know what I
They
mean?
came to, no, that answer is very simple. They came to us because law enforcement told us about them. All of the people that are all the young people referred to us come to us from law enforcement. And that goes back to why we started this initiative in the first place. We knew clearance rates are really low, 4% or so. So of all the cars that are stolen in Minneapolis, 4% of those cases actually get submitted to us at the county attorney's office for potential charging. So, and we know there are a number of reasons for that. Young people wear masks, I mean, all kinds of reasons for that. But knowing that that's the issue, right? I mean, aren't we here to problem solve? We know that it's a problem that law enforcement can't solve car theft cases. So rather than throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do, as the office has done in the past, we said to law enforcement, what if we meet with you and your data analysts, and you tell us the names of these young people who are at risk, and we'll run them through our database. And I know there's some frustration about we don't name names, but what difference does it make in terms of the law enforcement can't even get us a case, right? They can't get us a case. These aren't prosecutable cases. So this is something that allows law enforcement to share with us the young people that they suspect or they know. They may see running away from a car, but they just can't send us a prosecutable case. So this information comes from law enforcement.
Mary, that
Yep.
4% number that you mentioned with the clearance rate, so I want to make sure I have it crystal clear. Is that an average, like 4% of cases are solved by MPD?
It's not MPD. MPDs are actually a little lower than that.
Okay.
So just to be clear, this data, as it says, comes from the BCA. Nope, the BCA. So the BCA state agency requires individual law enforcement agencies to report their data. So everything that you see here is from individual law enforcement. This particular graphic talks about motor vehicle thefts and clearance, Hennepin County. So the 3.7% is across Hennepin County. Minneapolis, I think, is about 2%.
What I want to be clear on
Yep. Yes.
that percentage of cases.
Yeah, so the,
Saying clearly.
yeah, the 4% or 2% are the cases that come to us for charging. Yep, the rest of those cases never hit our desk. And understand too that the youth might have been arrested. That happens frequently. A youth may be arrested and held at the juvenile detention center, but if a case isn't submitted to us, by law, that child is released. We have no control over that. Wait over there.
I'm just curious how direct the relationship is between this program and the decline in auto thefts compared to 2023 to 2024. Like how can you say this program is successful? I know you mentioned earlier that you can't determine how many people steal cars are youth and how many are adults. And I'm just curious if you could speak to how direct the success of this program is to the decline in car thefts and what other factors may be at play there to that decline.
Yeah, to explain why crime declines, we rely upon criminologists years from now, but they would say there are probably several factors. What we do know for sure, car theft has gone down dramatically.
And are you saying that's in part because of this program?
We believe it is in part because of the program, because the clearance rates have remained about the same. So we're not getting any more cases from law enforcement. Auto theft has gone down. And I'm not here saying that this program is responsible for all of that, but it certainly is a piece of it. And we know that these young people, the 81%, were out there, because law enforcement tells us that, engaging in car theft. But those young people are not engaging in car theft, at least to the extent that we get any kind of prosecutable cases.
And I was just wondering what factors go into accepting a referral from a police department.
Do you want to talk about that?
So generally, when law enforcement submits a referral to us, our office, again, is doing a file clearance. So we're checking to see, is that child already system involved? Are they on probation? Do they have an open case in the court system already? Are they receiving support and services through a social worker, through child protection, or a truancy referral? So if they're not already open with the county in some way, then they're eligible as long as they are a Hennepin County resident or have close ties to the county and are under 18.
And Mary, I did want to ask also, just, it seemed like it's a big jump. I was hearing that it was, I think, compared to 2019 and 2023, it was like close to 200% increase in auto thefts. And then this most recent year, I think it's more like 140 or something percent. I guess I'm wondering, does it still seem like there's a long way to go with the work to reduce that number and to maybe get to pre-pandemic levels, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we know that crime had gone down since its peak after the pandemic, but not to pre-pandemic levels. Car theft was still going up, and so that was an outlier. That's why this is really good news. But I would never say, when we're looking at 9,000 or however many car thefts we have this year, one is too many, right? Nobody should have their car stolen. And when a young person is involved in that behavior, it can quickly escalate. So yeah, I mean, we have continued work to do. And on that front, this has been so successful that our law enforcement partners have asked us to expand it beyond car theft. So that should tell you how they feel it's being successful. And we have to work on expanding resources and capacity with Hennepin County. But that's a great sign that our law enforcement partners are saying, hey, this is working so well for car thefts. Can you expand it to, other types of offenses? Thank you.